Vamos a comenzar con la conferencia inaugural. Voy a presentar a Lynda en castellano. La charla va a ser en inglés. Cuando llegue el turno de preguntas, me dijo que podéis hacer las preguntas como estiméis oportuno, en inglés o en castellano, ¿de acuerdo? Bien, Lynda trabaja en el Dutch National Center for Mathematics and Computer Science en Ámsterdam. Es profesora asociada en la universidad de la misma ciudad y trabaja en temas de web semántica, interacción persona-máquina y multimedia. Fue editora de un libreto, More Women in Informatics Research and Education, encargado por la asociación Informatics Europe, y de hecho la charla que nos viene a dar es sobre un tema que, si no nos preocupa, nos debería preocupar, y creo que a la mayor parte de la gente de AINUI le preocupa, que es dónde están las chicas en informática. ¿De acuerdo? Entonces, ya sin más dilación, Lynda, tienes la palabra. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Is this the good? Excellent. So, I should warn you during this talk, for this talk, I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a social scientist. So, yeah, don't take me to court for my lack of scientific evidence. I became involved in this topic through my own experience when I was about 23. And I could see there weren't very many women in computer science, and at that time, artificial intelligence. And I assumed that my own generation would just solve the problem naturally as we grew up together. But I now look around and find that the problem has not gone away, and I'm almost alone. However, I am noticing in more recent years, specifically in the Netherlands and wider in Europe, that there is becoming far more awareness of the topic, and also more support for improving the situation. I myself became involved in becoming more active in this, and perhaps a little too active, as my daughter will tell you sometimes, through the board of Informatics Europe. So this is the Association of Computer Science Departments throughout Europe. My talk is in English because my Spanish is non-existent, but please feel free to ask questions at any point during the talk. You might have to stand up and jump or something because it's a bit dark over there. If you don't like using English, please feel to use Spanish, and I'm sure someone else will translate for me. This is a long talk, so you're going to have to entertain yourselves in the middle. So why should we care about this topic? The European Commission cares. They had some key findings from October last year on looking at the number of women active in the ICT sector. And basically the sector is growing, and we need as many competent people as we can possibly find. So if we're losing competent women because they're not staying in the sector, this is not good. So we want to get more girls interested in a digital career, and want to get more women into digital jobs, which will benefit the industry, the women themselves, and the European economy. But you're not Europe, you're computer science departments. So why should we care? Well, Google cares. Google cares so much, they've just invested, or they're going to invest $50 million into this. And they understand that the technology world has to win girls over at a young age. And they have read the literature, as opposed to myself. And they state there are 4 major factors that determine whether girls will opt into computer science or not. They require social encouragement, so at home, peers, school, and also self-perception. It seems that girls are far more influenced by the nerdy pictures of guys and lonely computer rooms and drinking coffee and eating pizza and staying up till all hours, till 4 in the morning coding. This does not give good images that girls want to respond to. They also need academic exposure, and they need to have some notion of what a career would be after they study computer science. So again, these images of the lone male, probably it's a lot to do with the Hollywood films. They need far more the female role models in technology. So Google cares. And, we want diversity in general. So today I'm really talking about gender, But diversity in general is just fruitful for many different organizations and groups of people. But for our cases, we want diversity for the digital industry and Europe's economy. And women also bring in this other dimension of communication. And this is also a difficult path to tread, because then women get labeled as, oh, well, put a woman there because she can communicate. But if you have a mixed group, it's about an awareness of who has which values and to treat these different values with the same weight. So very often what you perceive as women's skills are perceived as of lower status. And that's the type of hurdles we have to get over. So here's a little bit of the statistics just to make this really serious. The figures I'm going to show you won't last too long. They come from reports commissioned by the Dutch Association for Women Professors. So this is not computer science specific, but it lets you see the problem in the context of the different disciplines. And it also gives you a feel across Europe about how things are progressing. So this is probably the core slide of my talk in terms of what the problem is. This is what we call the leaky pipeline. So here we have some women and some men and their students. And, oh, look at that, it's about 50-50. Gosh, that's a coincidence. And then they graduate. And look, more women graduate because they work harder. I didn't say that. Then we get PhD students. Yeah, well, not everyone wants to be a PhD student. There's some competition to get the places. However, they get older, they become lecturers, or they don't. And as their male colleagues are getting promoted to senior lecturers, they don't. And as their male colleagues are becoming professors, they don't. So why is this? And in some sense, a lot of my talk's about the why is this. But this figure shows us the problem. The two steepest drops is from the PhD to a lecturer. This is the permanent position. So if you look, at least in my country, in the Netherlands, if you look at the number of PhDs and postdocs, they're sort of swimming around. There's hundreds of women. And then you look up higher up the ladder, there's no one left. So this drop here is a difficult one, a difficult barrier for women to cross. And then there's the lecturer to senior lecturer, which for some reason is the worst gap. Now, terms like lecturer and senior lecturer, I can't translate them directly to the Spanish situation, but that's your homework after this talk, is to go back into your own department and see, okay, what are the percentages at these different levels? So this is the leaky pipeline. And this is my much more beautiful image of the leaky pipeline, which we'll revisit at different stages in the talk. But when you see this image again, I'm referring to the graph of how the numbers of men go up and the numbers of women go down as they progress through their career. Okay, so you have some more numbers. Again, this is across all disciplines except medical. And here we have similar information in the sense that you have a higher number of PhD students than of professors, even though if your professors are coming from your PhD student population, these percentages should stay the same over time. But now you see the progress through the number of years. And there's a little bit of good news here. I mean, I won't get totally ecstatic, but there's a little bit of good news that the number of lecturers has doubled since 1990, so that's the figure down here. The number of senior lecturers and professors has actually quadrupled. Well, that's because there were such terrible percentages to start with, but okay. And we have nearly 15% of professors in 2011. Where are we up here? Professors, nearly 15%. So this means we're going to get 50% of female professors across all disciplines by 2060 at the current growth rate. So 2060, I don't know, is that your daughters or your granddaughters that are going to get there? So this is the problem. Some more numbers. So these are the different disciplines. So computer science is in this strange place between science and technology. I've highlighted the technology because that's worse than science. Agriculture is pretty horrible too. So even though in agriculture you have 55% of students are women, they only have 9% female professors. So this gives you a 16% ratio there. Technology, we start at 20%. Now, this 20% is an interesting number, which we'll come back to later. But if you have a mixed culture of men and women, then actually you need 30% of men and 30% of women to give you a stable mixed culture. And if we're only getting 20% of students, this means we're going to have to work at this for an infinite amount of time. So we have to work on there to get the female students in. And in fact, our ratio is not bad. We have a whopping 35% of the women who actually make it to professor. So I guess I'm one of those, right? Okay, looking at the situation across Europe, again for all fields, and remembering when you're looking at these numbers that while these numbers, the percentages look not bad, our technology numbers are lower. So, we're a tiny little blob on these larger stripes. So, the interesting thing to see, there's a factor 3 of difference between the highest and the lowest countries. So up here we have places like, I can't read them now, Romania, Latvia, and Bulgaria. And down this end we have Luxembourg. And then embarrassingly for me, the Netherlands is pretty close to Luxembourg in terms of numbers. And relatively embarrassing for you, Spain's here. So again, I don't know the numbers in computer science, but this is the numbers across the different disciplines. So we all have a lot of work to do. Again, there's some good news. In the 8 years for which this graph is based, there has been improvement across the board. So now we're looking at women professors across the disciplines from 2003 to 2011. And here's technology here, looking pretty sad. We do have quite a large increase, but that's because we started from almost 0. And even in the best disciplines, so that this is one of these graphs where 100% isn't at the top. So these are really long graphs, right? But the absolute number is still less than 25%. So even the humanities have work to do. And they have lots of female students. So the interesting thing in the Netherlands, at least, and again, these are things that you can do when you get back to your department, is of the professors above the age of 60, 10% are women. I'm not in that category yet. If you look at the professors under the age of 60, again, across the disciplines, then 30% of the professors are women. So that's looking more hopeful. So there seems to be some sort of generation gap happening here. And as long as we make sure the younger generation is getting better, then we're going to progress in the right direction. Okay, so now we've seen some of the figures. That's the end of the science. You can see that things are bad and that technology is one of the worst areas. And it's slowly getting better. So now I hope to give you some insights into why is this happening? What are the barriers? Why are women not getting to where they should be? So you've probably heard about a number of these barriers. We have cultural traditions. Motherhood is sort of more strongly associated with women than fatherhood is with men. Stereotypes about women's roles. We also have the barriers ourselves. For some reason, women, generally speaking, have a greater they have less self-confidence often than men, and are less good at bargaining skills. So there was a lovely story that I heard at one of my women networking conferences, where a woman goes for an interview, and she's being interviewed, or she's being offered a job by a female head of department. And the female head of department says, okay, we'd really like you to come and work here, and we're going to offer you this as a salary. And the woman being interviewed stops sitting there going, oh, that's fine. And then the head of department stands up, walks around the table, crouches next to the interviewee and says, this is when you say you would like some more money, please. Then she gets up and she walks back to her side of the table and waits. Because the women don't know where in the conversation you do these things. Women tend to be more risk avoiding and negative attitudes towards competition. So basically, the whole of the academic world is just one Darwinian ecosystem, and competition is where it's at. And again, this is something that women tend not to like to do. They tend to be more cooperative. And certainly in the environments I'm working in, cooperation would actually be very nice to add into that mix, but I'm not mentioning any names. So we have external barriers as well. A male-dominated environment. So it's not bad that men are around. It's great that men are around. There's just too many of them. And they tend to have difficulties in balancing personal and professional lives. Why would that be? There are plenty of men that have children and work full-time and get professorships. Why is it not true for women? And a lack of role models. And again, the women, for some reason, seem to be more sensitive to these role models. And it's also true that there have been serious studies done. If you put CVs and give them to committees to evaluate, and one's called Jane Mackay, the other one's called John Mackay, that Jane gets lower salaries and lower offers than John does, based on the same written evidence. So, and it's not just the men that do that, the women do that too. So there's all sorts of barriers here. So, how do we get around these barriers? We become aware of these barriers. And one of the biggest barriers is our own brains, our implicit social attitudes. Again, there's been a lot of work done on this, not by me, but certainly by people in Harvard, and they've constructed these tests. And you should really try this test. So a number of things you're going to get is homework. And one of them is you go home and try this test, and give it to all your colleagues to try too. And it's a very simple test to do, so even we computer scientists can do this test. It's just like binary, you do yes or no, left or right. So you're presented with, here we have two disciplines, science here, liberal arts here, and here's chemistry. And the task is to hit a button. In this case, it would be the left key, because chemistry is a science, not liberal arts. And then later, you do that a number of times, so like 20 different topics are given to you, and you have to say science, arts, as fast as you can. And then you've done that, you get a different section where you do similar things. So here we have philosophy, and you have liberal arts or female, and science or male. And then they start switching these associations round. So what your brain is doing is it's putting these concepts together in different categories. And what the test is doing, it's timing how long you're taking to do stuff. And by taking your timing on these clicks, it can work out what the pathways are in your brain. So is women closer to science, or is women closer to liberal arts? And amazingly enough, it works. And also, it explains a lot about why women have this wrong perception of them when it gets to science. Because there's stereotyping going on. So the few women that get into science and good at it, they're not perceived as belonging to the science category. I don't know if I'm allowed to boast and say I tried this test myself, and it turns out I'm actually not prejudiced. But that's probably because I'm just so involved in the whole topic that I get confused the other way around. Okay, so this is entirely for light entertainment, but I really, really liked this. And it made things clear for me, and perhaps also for my marriage, but this takes a little bit of setting up. Did that help? So bear that in mind as I go through my talk and I get distracted and go and talk about all sorts of other stuff. So maybe that's part of the problem, I don't know, but the real problem is there's no single problem. The other problem is that a male-dominated culture is self-perpetuating, as is a female-dominated culture. But as it happens in ICT, technology, computer science, we are faced with a current male-dominated culture. And the other thing is that assessment appears to be fair. So we all assume when we're going through all these committees and all these evaluations that the assessment is fair. And some of my male colleagues say, oh, well, if there are two candidates that are equal, then of course we'll take the woman. But the flaw in that argumentation is there are never two candidates that are equal, ever. So this doesn't work. And when you're doing assessment, you have to make sure your assessment is indeed fair. So for fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. I won't say who's the men and who's the women in that picture. You can think about that yourselves. And from the male perspective, sometimes you hear arguments, well, women just aren't as ambitious. They want to stay at home and look after the children. Oh, I have to work on this project. And from women's perspective, it's like, oh, but I'm just really good. I just do my work, I write all these papers, I'm brilliant, and I will get promoted, and there is no problem. And young women tend not to see the problem because they haven't hit the barriers yet. They don't want something special for women. I was like this when I was 25. I'd go to these women's talks, and there'd be these senior women saying, there's a problem, the women don't get promoted. And I'd go, well, they're just silly, what can they talk about? Now I'm 50, I go into these networks and I give these talks saying, there's this problem. And all the younger women are going, no, I don't see the problem. So what do we need to change? Well, if we have a culture that's self-perpetuating and we need to have a culture shift, we need to move from one culture to the other. Once we get there to this mixed culture, that will also sustain itself. Now, this is scientifically, there are papers on this, all right? I haven't read the papers. I know about the papers. If you really want to see the papers, I can direct you to the papers. But this mixed culture with 30-30 is stable. And what we need is a period of transition from one stable culture to the other. But we have to push a bit. We have to force some culture change. And being aware that we need a culture change is step one, and being prepared to do some of the pushing is step two. So how can we tackle the problems? It's not going to go away by itself. We've known the problem for years, and we want to, or at least with the tips I have today, I want to help you have best practices that can become part of the culture for sustainable change. So in CMU in the States, they went to a lot of trouble, I know, about 10 years ago, something like that. They had a lot of effort to get more women students in and to help them along their way. And it really worked. And then they stopped using all their newfound techniques, and then the women disappeared again. So if you want sustainable change, you have to have sustainable effort into doing this. And, this is where I start waving my booklet around. So I made this document. I'm a computer scientist. I do not like lots of words. I hate reviewing long papers. It's a very short document. You will all get a copy of this after the session. And it's basically a set of tips for a computer science department to really think about, okay, how are we going to address these problems? Which of these best practices do we want to implement? And what changes are we looking for? So this was done in collaboration with the Informatics Europe Working Group on Women in ICST Research and Education. And the best practices should generally raise awareness. They don't have to cost a lot of money, and actually they often help men as well. So it's all about women, but it's all about a shared culture and all working together for betterment of mankind, so to speak. So in order to get these tips, these best practices, I've been collecting them from many different sources, and also some of the longer documents you can find on the web. I think the University of Amsterdam had these long documents about gender and diversity and things like that. But when it comes down to it, the types of best practices they advocate, I've somehow summarized and put them in the booklet. And there's also a website from Informatics Europe with some background material. So if you are interested about the reports that come to these conclusions, then there's material there as well. Okay, so there's a number of categories of best practices. So this is where I'm going to go through these different things we can try and do. And these are the different groupings of them. And for each group, I know there's like 4 tips or 16 or something like that. So it varies in the number of different things there. And if we go back to the leaky pipeline picture, I'm going to go through these different, the different categories. So the leaky pipeline, you can have problems when you're trying to bring students in. You can have problems when you're actually looking for women to come and join your department. You want to interview applicants. And then, we all get children. And eventually, you want to promote the women you have in your department. And hopefully, at some point, you're going to get a professor out at the end. So let's do a couple of shows of hands. Which of your departments has female students? Everybody? Not everybody? So some departments without. Okay. Right. And which of your departments has female lecturers? Not everybody? Okay. And which of your departments has full female professors? Oh, that's good. Okay, very good. And does anyone have a department who currently tries to explicitly attract female students? So do you have campaigns for attracting girls from high schools or girls' days or, okay. Okay, so that seems like we have one person here that can give you their experience. That could be something you might want to try. Okay, so current status now, and now we'll go through the different categories of tips. So, scouting for talent. You want to find students, any students. But of course, I would like you to find female students as well. We can reach students through social media. So, we have to, our students develop this stuff, right? So we train all these computer scientists, they go and build all this stuff. We can use all the stuff they build. Twitter, Facebook, you name it. This is what the young people use. So use it from your departments to get access to these young people. When you invite them to the university for an open day or something like that, then again, it's more important for the women that you have female role models. So find some female students who are already doing the course, enthusiastic female students, of course, and women from your department who are doing the lecturing, maybe some PhDs, some postdocs, and put them in front of all these people. And you don't have to label them, this is a woman. They're just part of the introductory course, and they tell things just as any other people would tell things. But it's important for the girls there to see other women standing in front of them. It's also very important to depict women in recruitment brochures and websites. I now have, because I do this stuff for a number of years, I now get so allergic when I go to a conference website and all the keynotes are men. It's like, oh no, come on guys. There are some women out there, you just have to find them. And also with naming courses. So this is a really weird one. Name courses so they also appeal to women. What do you do? Do you call them Barbie Goes Sailing or something? Well, it's more subtle than that, but it's a bit strange. So human-computer interaction. Apparently women tend to like human-computer interaction. And then I talk to other women and say, no, but girls should be doing hardcore programming, assembly programming. I'm going, yes, I agree with you, but how do you track them in the first place? Multimedia lifestyle informatics. I got a comment from another colleague going, who on earth would call a course lifestyle informatics? Did you make that up? I'm going, no, it exists, and yes, it attracts a lot of women. Medical informatics, because again, women tend to like the application areas rather than the technology itself. Computational linguistics, for many years, has been attracting women. And the one I found out, I think just yesterday, and this is true, beauty and the joy of computing. I did not make it up. This is the Berkeley, I think, in the States. It worked. If it works, it doesn't hurt. Other things one can try and do, but again, this is where we get into this fuzzy area of, are we doing too much for the girls? Because the girls don't want you to do special stuff for them anyway. But somewhere in Norway, they wanted to get more women, and they set up a women-only common room, a study coffee room, where the girls could go and create their own space. And they decorated with posters and plants and coffee, and they could sit there and do their studying. And the guys weren't allowed in. The girls really loved it, and there was also another room where everyone could go, but it just made this other space that was just for the girls. So you can try it. It's controversial. I'm giving you the idea. you can take it away with you. Okay, so recruiting students, we've done that. Sorry, that click should have gone somewhere else. Recruiting female employees. Okay, this is a nice one. So I have another booklet that I didn't make myself, but it's in Dutch, which is unfortunate. But a PhD student from the University of Nijmegen, she read, I believe, 350 reports on professorial appointments. So every time a professor is appointed in the Netherlands, there has an official report which states, why this person was chosen to be professor. She read them all, and then she came up with the statistics, some of which I've showed you already. So the graph, the leaky pipeline graph at the beginning, is from her booklet. And she basically pointed out all these things wrong with the selection committees. And after she'd done all that, she then put together some very concrete best practices for heads of department, for deans, for the university as a whole. And basically, I stole her idea, and that's where this booklet was born. And this is in English, so at least you can read that. So many of the ideas I have in the orange booklet were taken from this booklet, but specifically for recruiting and promoting women. So thank you very much, Marieke, but she doesn't know. So the things that come out of that are, you have to describe the job criteria explicitly. So very often what happens is this old boys network, and person A knows person B knows person C, and person B says that person C is absolutely brilliant, and person A goes, oh well, I'll have person C then. No one else could possibly be better than person C. But then when you actually look to see the appointment, and you look to see what the criteria are, it says, oh, we need somebody that can do this. It's not even clear if person C can do this, but person C is really good, and then person C gets appointed. So if you describe the job criteria explicitly and actually start really looking at evaluating how your candidates correspond to your criteria, this is a good step for everybody, not just for women. Similarly, advertise your positions open and widely. Again, it still happens that you know someone, you know them well, you're very close to them, and you think they're very good, they would satisfy this position. But if you advertise nationally or even internationally, you get people who are actually better. And then you have to make a judgment for the department. Do you want this person you know, or do you want this person that will grow and become a future professor? Again, this applies to men and for women. Allow plenty of time for applications. For some reason, it takes time for the women to apply. I'm not quite sure why that is. I have no story about that. It could be that you have to activate the network, that women tend to be frightened by long lists of criteria on an advertisement. They call it the five-legged sheep in the Netherlands. So the person you're going to apply has to have 5 legs, because they have to be able to do all of this. And when the men read it, they look down the list and say, oh, I can do that, I can do that, oh, I can't do that, but it doesn't matter. I can't do that either, oh, but I can do this one much better. So, they can do 3 out of the 5. And the woman looks at the list of 5 and says, oh, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, oh, but I can't do that, oh, I better not apply then. So even at the application stage, you have to be very careful how you write the advert so the women will actually apply. And also, women like to be approached. Not that they like to be approached, everyone likes to be approached, but they might not even consider applying because they didn't find themselves good enough. So you phone them up and you say, hey, I think you should apply for this. And they'll go, what? Do you think so? And they say, yes. And I've also had it myself, but people will say to you, oh, yes, well, can you do this? And you sort of go, no, I can't. And you think, oh, shit, of course I can. But I've already said no. And the person listening to me believed me. So we have to be better with our first reactions. It's like, oh, sure, I can do this. This person asked me, therefore I can do this. And then the other thing you need to really think hard about is what to do if too few qualified women apply. This is something I see in my own environment happen again and again and again. There's an advertisement, it goes out, all these applications come in, there are 20 men, 3 women. You look at the female CVs and you think, oh man, no way do we want any of these. What do? The men are fine, they've got their candidates. Do we stop the process? Do we change the wording of the advertisement? I don't know. I do not know the answer to that one. So we need to think together, okay, what do we do if too few qualified women apply? Okay, so at last we've got our women who have applied. Now we're going to interview our candidates. It is true that, so again, going back to Marika, she found that when you had one woman in a selection committee, that the selection committee did not statistically select more women than the men-only committees, and actually you needed 2 women in the committee before it started making a difference. And certainly in my environment, where there are so few women, this puts a lot of strain on the women. It's like, oh, we have a new person coming in for interview. Let's take the 2 women in the department and put them on the committee. And the women are going, but I need papers. I have papers to write. I have proposals to write. I don't have time to sit on these committees. So, yes, from the perspective of judging the women, you want 2 women in the committee. But remember, if women are a scarce resource, you're just tearing them apart. So be aware of that. Give them less teaching or compensate some other way. When you're judging a CV of the women coming in, then take into account maternity leave and paternity leave. Luckily, the ERC, the European Research Council, has implemented policies in their own assessments for the starting grants and advanced grants that for every child a mother has had, you can add 18 months to their PhD date completion. So basically you're getting another 18 months of career to actually update your CV, which I think is very good. It's a random large number, right? It's just to try and give the women a competitive edge when comparing with their male colleagues. But you have to make sure that people in the committees are willing to judge in this way. So you can say, she got her PhD in 1990, but only judged from 1993. But then you look at her age, you think, oh gosh, she's a bit old, isn't she? So your committee has to be aware why you're doing this and has to be assessing the CV based on this information. Also in the Netherlands, it's standard for the Dutch Council, NWO, for taking this amount of time into account. Try and invite women for interview. So if you have 10 great male candidates and 3 great female candidates, then invite 2 men and 2 women. Don't invite the same ratio. At this transitional time, so when we have this balance, and you have 6 excellent men and 3 excellent women in a world where we have this mixed culture, okay, then you could invite 4 men and 2 women. But at the moment where we're trying to increase the numbers of women, consider inviting a larger number of women to the interview. When people are in interview, men and women, ask these people what they will do about increasing the number of women in the department. I've seen this a couple of times, and it's worked quite an interesting way. I've had responses like, oh yeah, well, if I have a man and woman of equal CV, then of course I'll select the woman, and that was all they had to say about it. And I had another person who had this really, really excellent views on what they could do at the students and at the teacher level and for the courses. I learned a lot from that person. So it's two-way. Are these people interested in the topic, and can they actually help you do something about it? Another difficult one is the support for the two-body problem. So again, statistically, women in science, because there's so few of us, are more likely to be married with a guy in the same area. So it's more likely that a woman has a two-body problem, so a husband or partner that needs a job, than the other way around. But there are men, of course, that have women that also work in science, and they also have a two-body problem. But it's a problem that arrives more often because more women are working in science. So the more women we have, the more two-body problems we're going to get. So at least be aware of it. And things to do are to consider the partner as an internal candidate for the positions in your institution. So it's a small step. You know, it's a cheap thing you can do, but at least it shows you're thinking about the problem. Okay, so now we get to motherhood, assuming you're still in the department, of course. So you've survived the PhD era, you've survived the postdoc era, you've now got a permanent position, and you're becoming a mother. Of course, you can become a mother anytime. I have PhD students who become mothers, but I don't actually recommend it. And motherhood, parenthood. So again, if we apply these things for women, they should apply to men too. I'm not trying to be discriminating here. So for example, certainly in the Netherlands, daycare is like between 8:30 in the morning and 6 at night. Perhaps it's more flexible here, but have meetings then so that these poor parents can put the child in daycare, get to work in a relaxed and non-sweaty way, have the meeting, and then get home in time to pick up the kids. And when people are working in the field and they're competing on their CVs anyway, they're going to work the extra time in their evenings, but it's just more convenient to have the meetings in, if you like, core office hours. When mothers go away to conferences, there are a couple of problems they have. Either they take the child with them, and then someone has to look after it, so the department could pay for childcare expenses at the conference. Or they have to leave it at home, and they have extra childcare. They need extra childcare for the child at home. And if you're actually breastfeeding, it's actually useful to have your partner along as well, because it's a very, very small child. So your partner can look after the baby at that stage, and then bring it to you every time you need to feed the baby. It's like, it seems sort of weird if you've never done it before, but if you're aware of the fact that motherhood is one of the barriers that stops women progressing as fast, then you begin to see the need for doing this type of stuff. And I've already talked about this 18 months per child. Sorry, that's my slide divisions. Evaluating staff, I've mentioned a little bit already about the need to be aware of your own unconscious prejudices, and you should try the test. I've also talked about a balanced representation of women in the evaluation committees. And in the same way that I said, when you have an advertisement for a position, you should be explicit about the criteria that will be used for the job. Also, when you're evaluating the different levels, you want to make these performance criteria explicit. And again, I see this in my environment in the Netherlands, where you see these guys who are at the lecturer level, and suddenly they're promoted to the senior lecturer level, and you go, well, how did that happen? And then the women go in and say, look, you know, this is my CV now, I want to become senior lecturer, what do I need to do? And it's a bit sort of, well, you can do this and do that and do the other, and they do that, they come back the next year, and then there's something else they need to do. Whereas if you have departmental guidelines or even university guidelines, it makes it much easier. The women can see what they need to do, what they can work at, and how they can get there. And there's some anecdotal evidence that women have a harder time saying no to teaching loads. So that they're teaching, and it's not, again, it doesn't just apply to women, but if men enjoy teaching, and it's perceived as not their criteria that you're going to get promotion for, whereas it's the research you should be working on, then people should be aware of that, so that they're not confronted with an unexpected, unpleasant news when they're going for promotion. Unless, of course, as a department, you decide that promotion is based on both research and teaching excellence. Again, make it explicit. Another thing happening at the University of Amsterdam, they have what they call an ambassador program. So they have certain people who they perceive as being high potentials, and they get special courses to understand how the management in the university works. And also, I don't training for writing proposals and things like that. So if you have something like that, or equivalent things, then make sure at least 30% in this program are the women. So you keep this magic 30% going to stop your pipeline getting leaky. Here, when I'm talking about promoting women, I don't necessarily mean going from lecturer to senior lecturer, but actually mean, marketing the women that you have, the excellent women that you have. So every time you have to nominate candidates for prizes or awards or prestigious tasks, or even for reviewing, whether you want to review a department internally or externally, then look for suitable women to propose. Don't just sit down and go, oh yeah, John's good at this, and Jim's good at that, and David's good at this. Pause for a minute and put down some Janes, some Sues, and some Marys. And one of the problems is, I was talking about this Harvard unconscious bias, is the speed at which we think of names. The men tend to think of male names faster, and the women tend to think of female names faster, which is fine in the mixed environment because then you get both sets of names. But in the male environment, you're going to get more male names more quickly. So just spend another 3 minutes thinking of some women's names. So these are the small things that can be done to change just a tiny thing in the whole culture. If there isn't a woman currently available, then train one. So whose fault is it? Is it the fault there are no women, or is it the fault that there's no support in the department? What else? When you have colloquia in your institute, make sure you invite sufficient women to give talks. I don't actually like giving talks. So when people ask me to give talks, I try and duck out. But I thought, well, I've been talking about women, I really ought to give a talk about it. So here I am giving a talk. So make other women give talks, even if they don't like it. Hold discussions between, create a network, a women's network. So again, I have experience of being in different women's networks. Some women's networks are great. You go and you have coffee and you complain about all the guys and all the things they do, and it's fun, and you're all this, and nothing happens, right? So you have your meeting and you have coffee and you go back to work and everyone's happy, and you have your meeting again, nothing happens. There are other women's networks where we sit down and we plot. And we plot how we can get the dean to put in rules to get the promotions of this and that, which takes you somewhere. So there are different roles for different women's networks. So you are sort of an activist committee who are trying to increase the number of women in your department, or you're a sort of self-support group that likes drinking coffee. Whatever. There are different types. Women have different needs for these things, so ask the women, what would you like? And different women will like different things, of course. But if you have a women's network, then support them. So give them money for coffee, or give them money for inviting keynote speakers, or give them time, compensation for the amount of time they spend in the women's network. Perhaps not the coffee type of network, but if they're doing strategic discussions within the department. And in any environment, then ask your senior personnel to act as mentors. So it seems that, I know, women don't necessarily go and ask for things. So you can offer mentorship. So a mentor is where you have a senior person who can look at the career of a more junior person in a sort of detached way. So it's not like their direct supervisor, and help them develop strategies for, okay, do you want to become a senior lecturer in 6 or 5 years from now, or would you prefer to target the education side, and what do you need to do? Which network do you need? So which people do you want to get to know in order to do this? And in my own experience, a mentor or a coach, they start asking you questions that you didn't even know you could ask the question. So I guess it was about 5, 6 years ago when I had my first coach, and she basically started asking me things I didn't even realize were there. And that is, I think, what got me so involved in this whole women thing, because it's like you were seeing in black and white, and people were talking about red and blue, and you're going, what do you mean red and blue? It's not this shade of grey. And now I see all these colors, I go, oh shit. So now we're trying to put a different space on them. I'm digressing, you see? It's all this zzz. Yeah, I think we've done all that. These are the 3 worst slides of the talk, and then we'll get back to more fun stuff again. Support measures. So, I think most of what I've talked about so far has been about the women themselves. So they're coming in, they're being promoted, they're being evaluated. But then you also have the departmental environment. So what can you as a department do to encourage, different groups to employ women, or to give visibility and promotion to the women in the department? So this is, if you like, looking down on the situation. So for example, do you want to offer incentives for groups when they employ a female member of staff? This is another controversial one. Why do the people getting more women get even more? They've got a woman, that's good enough. So you have to think about it. You could give them something like funds to hire a PhD student, or a research assistant, or give special equipment to the person herself. You could couch it in terms of, yes, but we're trying to get more female employees, so this is the carrot, not the stick. So we want to encourage people to get female members in. Another thing to think about very seriously is with employing excellent female postdocs. So certainly in the Netherlands, there used to be this fairly random selection of people to get a permanent position. And more recently, it's become more structured, and it's called a tenure track position. And in the tenure track position, you're offered a job, but it only becomes permanent 5 years after you've proved yourself. And this apparently appeals better to the women because they know what they're up against. So they know at the beginning what it is they have to do in order to achieve their permanent position. And it also means that in the midterm, they can review the criteria to see whether she's going to make this 5-year position. And this, it is competitive in some sense, but the competition is put beforehand. So you're still going to get excellent people, but they know what they're going to, the height of the barrier that they have to get over. Provide visibility and self-promotion training for all female researchers. So again, I'm talking very much in men, women, but the tendency is that women tend to sit down and do their work and not go around telling everyone about it. And often the complaint of the women is that the guys go around telling everyone about what they've done, and you think, well, what have they done? That wasn't very good anyway, was it? But the women have to learn about expressing to others what they've done, which makes them more visible and makes it easier for them to come on someone's radar when there is a selection for this committee or this review or this prize. But that's something the women have to learn, and they need help in learning it. I've talked a little bit about coaching and mentoring, and there are a couple of aspects to this. So there's the work and family demands, but again, that applies to both sets of parents, but also to deal with the competition for the scarce permanent positions. So it seems that many women are put off by the academic competition because they sort of think, well, I'm not going to become a professor, so why would I do my PhD now? Whereas my attitude when I was at that stage in my career is, oh, this PhD is really fun, oh, I really like this. Oh, and I can get a job as a postdoc here. Oh, this is really fun, I really like this. And it didn't occur to me to look more than a few years ahead. So I don't know if that's me or attitudes of different women. It's hard to tell. More support measures. Talk to the women in your department. Gosh, what an idea. Organize a lunch or something once a month, with heads of department and either individual women or with the women's network. Ask them how they view the organization. It's amazing what feedback you can get if you actually ask people, what do you think of our organization? Again, it's a low-cost thing to do, which gives these valuable nuggets that you can do something with. Scout and follow talented female researchers. So if we realize that there are fewer women, and if you come across a woman you think is really good, then somehow remember her name for some time in the future that it could be useful to you. This could be at a local level, national, or even international, when you go to conferences and meet, postdocs or something. You could anticipate the retirement of male professors by tracking some high-profile female successors. You can try and access national or international women's networks to see if they can help you look for good researchers. In the Netherlands, the Dutch network of female professors, they have their own database of members so that if somebody asks them for a particular criteria of women, they can find some names for them. And of course, with privacy concerns, they do that in the right way. Find successful role models. I think one of the more important things actually is here, is what we can do in terms of monitoring the percentage of women at all levels in the organization. So I was dragged out earlier to talk to the local television for a quick interview, and she was saying to me, what is the most important thing we can do? Should we have quota? And my answer was, no, we don't want quota. What we want is for each organization to look at its own figures and to look at its own targets, what they would like to happen in the near and midterm future, and to make their own action plans. And it's very important to include figures in departmental and national evaluations so that people start saying, look, you've got so many women, how many should you have and how are you going to get there? And then it makes it your department's responsibility to meet their own targets. If you get targets imposed from outside, then it's somebody else's problem, right? If it's your own target, it makes it much more real and it also makes it achievable. And one way of doing this is to assign a member of your management team, and preferably a scientific member of the management team because of the status thing. So you want someone with status to have this responsibility, so the two are seen as being something you're really keen on doing. And yeah, you could consider a women-only tenure track program until the representation is balanced. So this is another thing that is definitely controversial. In the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, they put together a tenure track a few years ago where they advertised for any discipline, and this is where this brain thing comes back again, you know, the men's brain and the women's brain, that women, for some reason, often work in interdisciplinary areas, and very often vacancies are put into a discipline, you know, sort of a narrow and deep discipline. But if you just advertise freely saying, we'll have any brilliant women, then it attracts brilliant women who work in these areas that don't quite fit into the boxes that are already there at your university. And we see here the current Queen of the Netherlands and the Minister of Science and Education welcoming all these excellent women who have been recruited at the University of Groningen for these fellowships. And there was some controversy in the country, but even then, other institutes in the Netherlands have taken this on. So my own university, Caroline McGilvray, they've now had 2 rounds of these fellowships, and they have some very, very interesting women coming to the department. This is across all of science, not just computer science. So it's something to consider. I'm not saying you should do it, I'm saying it's something that one could consider, and the argument for considering it is that we have a current imbalance and we're trying to go to a situation where there is a better balance. So Groningen now have, or at least in 2011, they had 122 female professors. So that's double what they had 5 years before. So, you know, great for the University of Groningen. Even though they do say they still have some problems when people have a female boss. The writing you can't quite read. That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. And they also do have problems with insubordinate behavior and women having problems looking after these people. It's something I've never had a problem with, but the women tend not to talk about it. So it's something that coaching or intervision should be put in place to allow the women to talk about these problems if they do have them. So there, if we close the leaks in our pipeline, then we're going to get all these excellent female professors at the bottom here. So I look forward to a future for that. So I just want to very quickly go through some other organizations that have similar goals to what I've been talking about this morning. The Dutch, I should write that in full. The Dutch Female Professor Organization, they have a network of female professors, of which I'm a member, and of which their courses have really helped me in thinking about some of these issues. And they also collect national statistics on women at different levels in academia. And Talent to the Top is, again, a Dutch organization. It came from the state, so it was state-financed initially, to try and promote better gender balance at top levels in not just academia, but also industry and public organizations. And they also have a network for allowing people to find top talent through their membership. Athena Swan is a UK organization where they give public awards for promoting gender equality. So this is academic awards, and I think the public here is important, so that departments can use as part of their recruitment to say, look, we have an award from Athena Swan, meaning we are good for women in our department or our university. And then ACMW Europe is from the ACM, the Association of Commuting Machinery, and just recently they set up an organization here in Europe, and that might be useful for the women in your own department. So the Dutch Network of Women Professors, they organize courses I mentioned, and they also provide this mediation between mentors and mentees. And they monitor every 3 or 4 years the number of professors in the Netherlands. That's where I got my statistics from. Talent to the Top, they volunteer people to sign the charter. So my own organization, in fact, both of them, CWI, they signed the charter, and also the University of Amsterdam, amongst the universities, signed the charter. And basically ask them to do these things I was mentioning. So you assess your situation, you measure these things, you set your own targets, and in this case, Talent to the Top, they actually give you feedback on these targets. So the feedback is private. So you give your information to them, they assess it for you, they send it back, and they let you know how other organizations in your sector are doing, so you can compare yourself if you're doing worse or better than similar organizations. So this is private. Whereas the Athena Swan, the awards are public. So you have to go through a fairly strenuous auditing of your department. And once you've done that, you give all the figures and they decide what level of award you get. So again, it's very similar things to Talent to the Top. But in this case, once you finish doing all this, the award is public, so that other people can see what level you've achieved in terms of the gender equality. And ACMW Europe, they're very interested in helping the women themselves. So I can imagine women in your department might want to become involved in ACMW Europe. I myself am involved through my Informatics Europe connection, so I'm a board member of Informatics Europe. And as the board member who's the chair of the Women in ICT in Informatics Europe, I'm also sitting on the ACMW Europe board. So we have this communication across the organizations. And their most important event so far was a Women Encourage event at Manchester this year, where we had some like 200 attendees, of which 28 were men. So it's not necessarily women only, but the men are allowed to come along as well. And there were 48 student posters, so the students can look at their own work and network amongst themselves, also on the technical side. And there were a mixture of presentations, either on the scientific side, but also for a role model, so a career of a woman and how she went on, and a couple of panel discussions. So this is very much the networking side of things. So in closing, basically, gender is not only a women's issue. We can't do it on our own. It has to be an issue taken up by all the men around us. And it's only one aspect of diversity. So while you're taking up the gender issue, you can also consider whether you want to generalize this to other diversity issues. And I think maybe the most important thing is we need extra measures in this transitional period. If we want to change the culture, it is changing culture. It's not just changing number of people's in desks. It really is a cultural change that's needed. And you need extra measures in this transitional period. And you need to tackle these at different levels. You can't do it just by doing one measure. You can't just bring in more female students. If you just bring in more female students, they will leak out the pipeline at the next stage. And if you just promote senior lectures to professors, then you have all these role models professors, but you don't have any students coming in. So you really have to tackle these different parts of the leaky pipeline simultaneously. Okay. So my final quote is, when do we stop giving extra gifts to women? And the answer is when we've reached a stable, self-perpetuating mixed culture with a minimum of 30% women and 30% men. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lynda. Any question? ¿Alguna pregunta?
Hi. Many of the measures you proposed make perfect sense for me, such as evaluating staff and the like, but many of them remind me of the joke about the animals climbing the tree, in the sense that they are very visible measures, and you delivering a strong message, such as, yes, you really are that different. You really need a lot of help to break into this tough men's business, like the animals are different. Are you considering the effect of that visibility, or?
What was your last sentence? Am I doing what with the effect of the visibility? Am I? Sorry? The last sentence I missed. Am I doing what with the effect?
The effect of the visibility of those measures that transmit the idea of yes, you are a different animal. Right. You are an elephant. The men are apes.
Yeah. I think it's something to do. I think the answer has to be yes, because if we say that women are all the same, then there's no point looking at the statistics because they can be classed as the same animal. But when we look at these statistics and you do this gender split, there is statistically significance. So there must be something different. And I think what I'm trying to do is, okay, I'm really exaggerating, I'm making things bright pink and bright yellow, what the differences are. And in real life, of course, it's a vague shade of pink and a vague shade of cream. But I think it really helps to think about the different dimensions of where the problems are. So it is that women market themselves less well, and the men are better at being competitive, things like that. So I think we have to acknowledge that, look at what we do with it, and then take the steps. And I think the invisible prejudice is perhaps the most important one. And that's not just for the men, that's for the women as well. That we all have this same culture, we all have these sort of automated ways of assessing people.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? No? Oh, here.
You can ask in Spanish or whatever, I don't mind.
I just simply missed your last sentences. When do we stop?
When do we stop? Yeah. All right. When we have this 30% women, 30% men, minimum, and then you get a culture which is self-perpetuating, and then we're done. But this magic percent is 30%. And the good news, it doesn't have to be 50%. It's not that we have to wait till there are 50% women. And I think if you look at computer science across many different cultures, 50% is probably never going to happen for women because not that many women are interested in this type of topic. And I wonder if even 30%, we can actually reach 30%. And we should be aware as a community, if we can't reach the 30%, then we have to be aware that the pipeline will leak continuously forever. So, yeah, I don't know how you persuade all your Spanish schoolgirls to really want to do informatics.
Congratulations, I've enjoyed your talk very much. Now, but about this point, in a sense, probably it must never stop. In the sense that we have to change society, and so it's not that we stop doing special measures, it's that the special measures become part of normal measures.
I agree, absolutely. So this sustainable change, definitely. which I think I said with the CMU, that they stopped implementing these measures and all went back to the way it was. And yes, you're correct, yeah.
Of course, you could also say that when you do something like that, that you stop the special measures and all go back, then you have a nagging idea that perhaps what's happening is that I'm trying to implement an artificial ecosystem, and that
That's true,
it will
yes,
never
yes.
naturally be that.
Right.
It's difficult
But I
decisions
say-
to make, but
yeah,
I mean, they
agree.
have to be made.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you get this 30-30 mix, this self-perpetuating culture, hopefully this will also have these measures in, as you say, automatically. And I mean, everyone becomes a parent. It's not just mothers who become parents. And I think in the, what do you call it? Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Scandinavian societies, they're much more aware of this. And I think the fathers sometimes, in one of the countries at least, they have to stay at home for a year for every child. And it's not that they want to stay at home, they have to stay at home for a year. And this makes the men really understand much better what it is to have maternity leave. And it really does this mind switch thing. I don't think the Netherlands or Spain is quite ripe for that measure yet, but we can certainly consider it.
More questions?
On the left.
Oh.
Gracias. En español. Luego te traducen. Yo quería preguntar si crees que este mismo proceso habría que hacerlo, pero al contrario, en profesiones como, por ejemplo, educación infantil o enfermería, donde el 80-90% de los profesionales son mujeres.
Okay, Marianne was asking if these same measures should be applied to traditionally female professions like teaching in primary or infant school or nursery or medicine. Because
Favouring men. Oh, right, yes. So certainly the nursing profession, things like that. Yeah, probably, yes. I mean, I think there it's a self-perpetuating female culture, and if there are men that feel they want to go there and cannot, then I totally agree. Yes, we should change those cultures there, yeah. But we don't need to do that, right? We're the computer scientists, but they can borrow my talk.
si no hay más preguntas, if there are no more questions, we're going to have the coffee break in the third floor, and maybe some of you want to talk in a more close way with Lynda. And thank you again, Lynda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.